And welcome back to Open Your Eyes. We are about to venture off now into our first segment for the morning. And the advent of Lent. And today being Ash Wednesday, start the Lenten season. But to tell us more about it, we actually have with us Father Jeremy Zipple, who is representing the St. Martin's de Porres Parish. Sir, good morning.
Good morning. Great to be with you guys.
It's nice
Happy Lent. Happy Ash Wednesday.
Happy Lent. Happy Ash Wednesday indeed, which leads us into starting the conversation right there. The advent of Lent. And we won't go into the beliefs as yet, but tell us about the advent of Lent. How did this come around, and where did we...
Well, I mean, there's several sources in Scripture and history for this celebration. I mean, Ash Wednesday specifically, if you look at several passages in the Old Testament, like Jonah. Remember Jonah who goes into the whale? Yes. Yeah. And he's trying to... God has sent him as a prophet to the people of Nineveh, and he's trying to get them to get their act together because they've just been misbehaving. The whole place is a mess, you know?
Yeah.
And so he goes around preaching in the city. And much to his chagrin, they actually do convert. He hated them. He didn't want them to convert, but they did. And the king orders everybody to put on sackcloth and ashes and, sort of dressed in a penitential manner. Mm-hmm. And that got God to, change his mind about destroying them. So it worked. So there's a couple stories like that. Queen Esther in the Old Testament where a day of fast and penance, a period of fast and penance is declared, and people put on their sackcloth and ashes and get into that mood. So that's sort of the history. I mean, it's ironic. Jesus says, when you fast, and that's the reading if you go to Mass today that you'll hear, Jesus is saying, when you fast, don't make a big deal about it, go into your room and do it by yourself. Don't let everybody know, hey, look at me, I'm super holy. I'm in a fasting mode right now. So kind of ironically, Jesus said don't do that. They did it in the Old Testament. Jesus says don't, but the Christian church has been doing it for a long time, even though Jesus said not to. From around the 500s onward, Pope Gregory I, I think, sort of declared it as a day, Ash Wednesday. There's a day that everybody needs to atone for what they've done and get their life back in order, beginning of Lent. And by maybe around the year 1000 AD, so 1,000 years ago, it was universal in the Christian church. So everybody in the world who was Christian was celebrating this day.
Yeah. It's also the start of the Lenten season. And a time for people to prepare for what is one of the most significant commemorations in the church, from Good Friday into Easter Sunday. The traditions that you speak of, we were joking about them before, but some of them, not the mermaid ones, are actually tied to what the Bible speaks of, fasting being one of them. Let's talk about the origins of some of this.
Fasting, yeah. Well, as I mentioned earlier, there's several instances in the Bible when people have to fast. It predates Christianity for sure. There's the Jewish faith, which is sort of our fathers in the faith. Christianity, Jesus was a Jew and his disciples were Jewish, and so Christianity very much came out of the Jewish tradition. So the Jewish tradition has holidays devoted to that. Yom Kippur is like the end of the year, and it's a day of atonement. That's literally what that means, Yom Kippur. And like they're very serious about it. You don't eat anything for 24 hours or drink nothing. You just starve for 24 hours. And you also kind of hit a reset button. I have some Jewish friends who they use this day. The idea is the year's coming to a close and you need to restart your life, and you get a chance to do that, to amend relationships that have been broken, As Joel says, this is the first reading at Mass today, rend your hearts and not your garments. So it's a time to rend your hearts, to break open your heart a little bit and sort of see where are the things that have gone wrong and how can I get them back on track. So I have Jewish friends who will write emails to people or letters to people to say, look, we have had this, and we've been vexed with each other for this past year, it's been really bad.
Like a start afresh moment.
So we need to start afresh, exactly. So those are the Jewish traditions that Christianity kind of inherited as we started talking about our own fasting.
It's like a purge, I guess.
A purge,
That's
exactly. That's a great way of putting it.
And it's also common in other religions. We know in Ramadan, the Muslims will also fast as well during the sun time hours. What are Christians really supposed to do? Because there's a lot of different.
Good question. That's a good question.
You know, are you supposed to fast on Ash Wednesday? Are you supposed to fast every Friday? There's so many different rules, and you can understand. You know, we grow up in a lot of our school systems are Catholic, so we have kind of the foundation of it. And it just changes as you get older.
Sure, yeah. Well, and it's also changed. I mean, like prior to Vatican II Council in the 1960s, it was much stricter. In some Christians, it's still much stricter. I think there are some Eastern Christian churches that have to fast 180 days, 200 days a year, you know. So we Roman Catholics at this point are pretty lax. It's very easy. The only thing that the Vatican requires, the only thing that the church law requires is you are not allowed to eat meat on 2 days of the year, namely today, Ash Wednesday, and Good Friday. So no meat on those 2 days. Although fish is okay. Fish is not considered meat.
Okay.
So you can go out to the quay and get some, not lobster, I think the lobster season's over now.
Yeah, good.
But, you know, some snapper or something.
Yeah.
But no meat on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. And then any Friday during Lent, no meat. So basically, that's the abstinence part, no meat. Those 2 days, and then Fridays during Lent. But then these 2 days, I started to get that backwards, but Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, you're also not allowed to eat between meals. So this is what we do for fasting, all right? The fasting is pretty easy.
Oh, it's not fasting all day.
It's not fasting all day.
So you have your 3 meals.
So you can have 3 meals, but the idea is
snacks.
No snacks. In the first 2 meals are supposed to be small meals. So like the third meal is supposed to be no bigger than the 2 previous meals that you had. I'm like, well, couldn't you just like eat a really big breakfast and a really big lunch, and then have an even, you know, then the dinner can be, you know.
Yeah.
But that's cheating. So the idea is, today you're not supposed to eat between meals, and to have just 3 small meals over the course of the day.
Yeah. Father Jeremy, what are you seeing within the Catholic faith? I'm not sure how long you're in the country.
I've been here for 2 years, almost 2 years now.
All right. So what are you seeing, especially there at St. Martin de Porres, in terms of the turnout and the belief that people are really getting into it? Are they abiding by the traditions? What are you noticing?
Yeah, well, I would say, I mean, Martin's a very vibrant parish, you know. It's a great place. It's one of the most fun churches I've ever been assigned to. I just love it, you know.
Yeah.
And so we have a very dedicated congregation. We have, you know, pretty much even the 6:30 a.m. Mass is filled. But I think every generation, my other job is working with the 6th form students. I'm kind of a chaplain over at the 6th form and the high school SJC. Yeah. So that's working with the younger generation over there. And I find that they are equally spiritually moved, but maybe some of the older traditions don't make as much sense to them. I think the church has to, in every generation we have to, or we die, you know, think about, well, where is the Holy Spirit moving us at this point in time, in this moment? We can't just like, oh, this is what we've always done. And I think that's why Jesus is saying the same thing in the gospel too. He gets mad sometimes at the Pharisees and the scribes. They're his favorite target to rail up against, you know, because he's like, look, guys, you know, you've done it the same way so many times that you've actually forgotten what it's all about. You know, he's saying that in the gospel today. You've been fasting so many times that you've forgotten what it's about. For you, it's just become a show. You know, this is what I do. I show up and I fast and make everybody see it. You know, so he's saying, look at your heart, and maybe some of those traditions are actually getting in the way of where your heart should be. So when we're working with, I think with the young people, you know, you can't just always say, well, this is how we've always done it. You know. Where what speaks to them, where their heart leading, you know. I think I'm not saying traditions are bad. I love traditions, you know, and they're very much a part of our church, you know, but it's a balance, you know.
Yeah. And you know, I think even if traditions do change, and I think, well, that's not really what we're talking about today. It's just that over time, sometimes the symbolism behind it gets lost. And so, you know, the real purpose as to why you would do something as a part of your faith just no longer becomes the most important reason. It's what you're doing versus the why. And how do we bring it back to that? So we joked about the superstition. I know some people be mad that we joked about it, but just in all honesty, some of the things, like I remember now when you said no shouting, I remember we were also not allowed to make a lot of noise or have fun, specifically on Good Friday. But it was because it was a day of mourning. Let's talk about why these traditions exist and why this period of Lent is seen kind of like a solemn time. In Christmas, in Advent, we're preparing for a celebration.
Yeah.
But this time, we're really preparing for what is sad, and then we rejoice.
All right, well, I'd say a couple things to that. One, Jesus himself spent 40 days in the desert after he was baptized by John in the Jordan River and before he began his 3 years of public ministry. You know, he was crucified when he was 33 years old, more or less. So from age 0 to 30, he really didn't do anything. He had a normal life. The Bible skips all over that, except for the little story about when he was 12 years old and went into the temple and got in trouble with his parents, you know, for running away, kind of. So other than that, we don't know anything about Jesus from the time he was a baby until the time he was 30 and got baptized by John in the Jordan River. He probably just lived a normal life. He was training to be a carpenter with his dad, or some kind of manual labor, not necessarily a carpenter. That word doesn't always mean carpenter, but anyway, manual labor, manual labor of some sort. Maybe he's building houses for the Romans. And going to church, going to synagogue every Saturday and learning his prayers and doing the things that a good Jewish boy would do. That's what he did for 33 years. But now he's been baptized and it's time for him to start his public ministry. And he goes out into the desert for 40 days to prepare for that because he has an inkling that it's going to be difficult. You know, it's going to be a difficult 3 years. He's going to exhaust himself serving people, healing and preaching and teaching. He's also going to run into a lot of opposition, you know, scribes and Pharisees. So much so that they're going to kill him. You know, they're going to torture him and kill him in a very violent way. So I think he goes out in the desert to get his heart ready to do that very difficult ministry. To really say, okay, Lord, Father, you know, can you give me the strength to do this, and is this really what I'm supposed to be doing? He's 100% human. We forget that sometimes, you know. But he has the same fears and anxieties that we have, you know. So he's out there trying to get ready and making sure this is his call. So I think that's one of the things we do to sort of focus our lives. Maybe we've been running this direction and this direction and this direction. Now we have 40 days to sort of say, no, where is my heart really finding its stillness and its peace? And what is God really asking me to do with my life at this particular moment? So I think that's a good part of Lent, to just center ourselves. And we got phones and noise and 100 million obligations every day. So just to take some time to be still and take stock and see where our heart is, you know, and let God speak to us and say, what is our mission right now? What am I asking you to do with your life right now?
We've spoken about that so many times via the eye opener, whereby we try our best to show people that sometimes you take that time to just reflect. And by reflecting, it's actually building more on your battery, on your way to move forward. Let's talk about some of the, not necessarily the obstacles, but some of the things that leading up within the Lenten season. Like, for instance, we've got Palm Sunday, and let's talk about some of those stops.
Palm Sunday, sure. Well, Palm Sunday is 1 week before Easter, so
what's the significance?
It's the beginning of Holy Week. The significance is that when Jesus, so as I just mentioned, you know, he's out in Galilee doing his ministry for 3 years, and at the end he goes to Jerusalem. And when he's going into Jerusalem, there it is, there's the schedule right there. So when he is going into Jerusalem, it's kind of an interesting entry because he knows he's going into that city to probably die. They're probably going to take him and kill him and crucify him. He doesn't know that for certain, but you know, he has a pretty good inkling. The pressure has been up on him for a long time now. They've been trying to figure out a way to get him. So there's this sort of spontaneous procession where they put him on a donkey, and you know, and all the poor peasants come out and sort of start waving their palm branches and welcoming him into the city. It's really, some scripture scholars say they're parodying the powers of the day because Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, keep in mind the Jewish people are under occupation now by Rome. They're the overlords, like the British were here 20 years ago, you know, to use that analogy. So more than 20 years ago, sorry, 40 years ago. So the Roman governor would have come up for the Jewish holidays as well, Pontius Pilate, with a big military procession, huge military, swords and everything, and come into the city in the same way, but a show of might. And Jesus is going in with a show of meekness, you know. We're not coming with guns, we're coming with peace, we're coming with mercy and love.
Or
so
on
that's
a donkey
where
and it's
on
palms,
a donkey,
yeah.
yes, exactly, as opposed to on a horse with Roman legions, you know, leading you in, as the governor would have been. So he's sort of critiquing power and might. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
And so that's what we recreate.
And so that's what we
Palm
create
Sunday.
on Palm Sunday, his triumphant entry into Jerusalem. But it wasn't triumphant in the sense that we say, you know, with lots of power. It was just Jesus with the people who had been healed and come to understand his ministry. And of course, that's a Sunday. So on Friday of that week, he is crucified, you know, and then we enter into the, celebration of his crucifixion and death, and then ultimately his resurrection on Easter Sunday.
Absolutely. Now, when you said you work with the junior college, so you're working with teenagers and young adults. When you look at where we are in society, it's always, I think sometimes what happens when we think of church is we think of it separate from community, and it's so important sometimes that we're able to match the relevance between what the church represents and what's happening in the community. We're in a very turbulent time here in this country. How do you take a message, if it's in mass, if it's just in conversations with especially young students, how do you take this story? Because it's an amazing story of what we will celebrate, and put it into context to everyday life so that it resonates and we can understand more of the significance of what we believe in.
Great question. Let me just read real quick. This is from the prophet Isaiah. If I can find it here. Here it is. The prophet Isaiah says, this is what a true fast consists of. I know we've been talking about, not eating today between meals. And I know we've been talking about, putting ashes on our foreheads. Isaiah says, is this not the fast I choose? This is God talking. Is this not the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to let the oppressed go free, to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? And when you see the naked, to cover them, and to not hide yourself from your own kin, from your own people. That's what Isaiah says a true fast is. We've talked about, food and other stuff, but no, it's about, there's a social justice element as well, which I find the students really resonate with, and sometimes we as a church forget about this. We're trying to build a society that we can live in where everyone is treated as God's child, where
You mean not just churchgoers?
Not just churchgoers, yes, of course, yeah. Where people who are hungry are fed, where people who are naked are clothed, and God is, even from millennia ago, Prophet Isaiah is writing 2,500 years ago saying that a real fast is taking care of those on the margins and people who really need it, rather than taking care of yourself, like we talk about corruption or whatever, the kind of things that we're all tempted to. It's not just politicians, every one of us has a desire to let me just,
take care of me
take
first.
care of me.
Yeah.
Yes. No, we're called to be brothers and sisters of everyone, and to see that every heart has God dwelling in it and is a child of God. So.
Yeah.
What about the sacrifice that we make for the 40 days? Where does that come from? So everybody's supposed to give up something? For Lent, right?
Yeah. That's a good question. I'm not exactly sure where that originally started, but it is just, again, kind of in keeping this up. Let me not make it all about me and my ego and the things that feed me. By giving up something that you like. And ideally, some people I'm like, don't give up anything, because you're just being even more grouchy than you usually are.
Surely that's not what all priests say, but Father Jeremy does.
You don't want me giving up my coffee, okay? If I give up coffee for Lent, I will be unpleasant for everyone,
So I read this post. It was actually on the Jesuit post that priest wrote saying, reflecting on the idea of fasting for 40 days. And it was really interesting because it put it in perspective. I can't remember his name, and it'll take me forever to find it. But he said that a lot of what we've moved to is kind of doing fasts for a selfish reason. So it's like, I'm going to try to achieve these financial goals I've always wanted to during Lent, or I'm going to achieve my weight loss goal during Lent. And perhaps taking on things with more of a selfish reason. And his suggestion was do nothing. Well, in the context of exactly what you said before, which is there's a lot of distractions, and maybe just taking time for you to do nothing may be one way. Are we sometimes missing the message of what giving up something really is? That maybe we're giving up bad habits that we've always wanted to keep, and we should really be thinking of giving up something that will make us a better person.
Yeah, that's an interesting theory, and I saw that article. I can't remember who wrote it now either, but I think there's something to that. I think it, just to use Lent strictly for selfish goals may not be a good idea. On the other hand, I would say doing something just to remind you that you're in the season, even if, there's an old saying, I've never met a motive that wasn't mixed, I mean, you can do it, partly for God and partly for that. I think just doing something every day that reminds you that you are in this season, and hey, you're also keeping yourself from getting heart disease by cutting back on your fat intake. That's not a bad thing either, That's not a bad thing either. So I would say I like both those ideas. I like if you just feel like it's getting to the point where it's all about you, then just spending 5 minutes in prayer that you might not normally. Maybe if you spend 5, spending 10, or if you spend none, spending 2 or 3 when you get up in the morning. It's not like you have to go out and radically, change your spiritual practices for Lent, but doing a little bit more just to remind you that this is a special time. Maybe just spending some still time with yourself and God, not a bad idea.
Just listening to this takes me all the way back. And I always talk about, back in the day and how it was. But Father Jermaine, one of the realities at this particular point, families don't really, they're not too particular about going to church. They're saying, you know what? The body is a temple. I could make my prayers right here at home. But especially in the Lenten season like this, what would you recommend for them to, let's get together and give thanks for this particular season at least? What would you say to these people?
Well, I would say there's really no point in, it's great to have a relationship with God, and, and I don't knock anybody for whatever they're doing. You don't have to, maybe I'll get a letter from the bishop for saying this, but you don't have to go to church to be a Catholic. You don't have to go to church to have a relationship with God. But I'm not saying you shouldn't. I think that coming together as a community to worship and support one another is really critical, and believers have done that from the very beginning. You look at God calling out the Israelites, a people, a community, not individuals, but a people, to be God's chosen people and to walk with Him together. And that's what we do too. When I look out at Mass at Martin's on a Sunday, and I just look out and I see people, and I know this person is going through this, and this person is going through that, and this person's struggling with this. Hey, we're all going through something. We're all sinners. We're all kind of limping along, trying to make it on this pilgrimage called life. And here we are doing it, holding one another's hands with the help of our God as a community. That's a great thing. That's not a burden. That's a beautiful thing to be doing that with people. And I think in the States even more so, and I really worry and hope this doesn't happen in Belize. I think in the States we've just become so atomistic sometimes, that we're like, here's your family, and I live in the next neighbor. We live in this big subdivision and big houses, and the next neighbor is way down here, And so you could totally, and we're not going to church or any kind of community thing, Rotary, and so we're just kind of like living our own individual lives with our screens. That's a terrible way to exist, We're human beings. We're communal animals. We always have been. And we worship in community too, I think. So that's my thought. Yeah.
So, I think I get what you're saying. No, I'm just thinking the people are saying, what do you mean don't go to church? But it's part of what happens, I think, as society. You said it with the young people. There's change, and people see things differently. We perhaps grew up, believing that what was told to us about our faith was just what it was. we just see things in a different light, and information is more accessible. So it's not about whether or not you go to church, it's who you are when you're not in church.
Right, exactly. And I mean, I really encourage, we've started something with our sixth form students in campus ministry. We call it Southside Sundays. And once a month, a bunch of students from sixth form come over to Mass at Martin's for the 7 p.m. Mass, and then we have a little social afterwards dinner. And they love it, you know, and each time the crowd is getting bigger. And it's just like doing things a little bit differently. I think part of it is on us as pastors and as ministers and lay ministers. It's on us as church to not just do the things that we've always done, whether it's music or whatever else. We can't just be like, oh, this worked 50 years ago, we're going to keep doing it. No, you know, we have to adapt. That's part of our obligation as ministers.
I mean, you're in a particular community that has many challenges. I mean, you live in where you would hear shootings and murders, and the children who go to school have family members they've lost or witnessed it themselves. So it's a very unique perspective that you bring in what you experience there. What's a typical message? Especially, I mean, we're talking all Lent, and there's a lot that happens during this time. But what's a message that you, if you were giving a homily to all of Belize right now, reflecting on the season that we're starting and reflecting on the season we're in this country, what would be your message?
Okay. This story just popped into my mind. When I was living in Boston some years ago, I went to university in Boston. There was a Jesuit, an older Jesuit named Father Ron Tiselli. And Father Ron decided he was going to go down to the Suffolk County Prison downtown Boston and give some ashes out there. And so he's on the subway, the T, as we call it in Boston, and he has a little plastic bottle of ashes in his pocket. And he gets off the T, the subway, and starts walking toward the jail. It's not the best part of town, okay? And soon a guy comes up and puts a gun to his back to mug him. And he says, hold still. And he starts reaching into his pocket to take his wallet. And instead he comes out with the bottle of ashes. And he's like, what is this? And then Father Tiselli turns around and he's wearing his black collar, like I was the other night at our trivia. He's wearing his priestly collar, and he turns toward him, and the guy and Father Tiselli says, "It's Ash Wednesday, and those are ashes. I'm going to give ashes at the prison." And the thief says, "Oh, Father, sorry." And he turns around and starts to run. And then he turns back and he says, "Oh, wait, can I get some ashes, Father?" So Father Tiselli says, "Sure," you know, and he goes up to him and he says, "Repent and believe in the gospel." You know? But I think, you know, we slap those ashes on to remind ourselves, you know, whether we're all thieves in a way, you know, we've all we're all sinners, we've all done things that we're not proud of. As St. Paul even says, you know, I see the good things that I want to do, but I choose the things that I do not. Even a great saint like that is struggling to try and walk the path of light. So I think that's what it is. We slap those ashes on to remind us that where we do want to be, you know, we want to be people of love, of forgiveness, of mercy, people who are trying to walk in the path that the Lord has laid out for us, but we fail again and again, you know. So to sort of just put those ashes on there to remind ourselves that, hey, we're sinners, we're trying, you know, we're trying. I think is what it's about.
Excellent. Wow.
Right.
Oh wow, that was good. that was excellent. But
So now you have to get your ashes today.
yeah, we need to do that. We need to do that. But we're so thankful that you're able to uplift us, especially on the start of the Advent of Lent. Definitely, we're so thankful for that. We know that Mass is coming up, of course. Today, Ash Wednesday. How can people?
What's the schedule?
What's the schedule?
Okay.
Martin's.
Well, over at Martin's, we have a 9 o'clock. We just had a 6:30 Mass. We have a 9 o'clock school Mass, but anyone is invited to come to that.
That's
for our
this
primary
morning?
School this morning, and then tonight we have a 7 p.m. Mass at the church. So, yeah, stop on by.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gracias, Padre.
Great, thanks for having
Do
me.
you know what you're giving up for Lent? I didn't ask you that.
Yeah, what's
I am giving up Twitter because I tweet a lot. And I'm like, I just have to take a break from social media. Sometimes I rail up a little too much on there. So I'm just going to take a step back.
Okay.
40 days, no Twitter.
No Twitter.
Right.
Everybody's going to be looking for you on Twitter now. But thank you very much.
Thank you,
We're
Sarah.
going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we're going to be joined by representatives of the student government of the University of Belize. That's coming up after the break, so stay tuned.